As we head into Week 12 fantasy football, guys, you have to understand something very important when it comes to making fantasy football trades. This may very well be your last chance to make any sort of meaningful trade in your fantasy football league. I've been saying this for weeks. It gets harder and harder and harder to make very significant, impactful fantasy football trades, especially when you get to this certain point. You're not fooling your league mates on getting certain values. You're not going to get CeeDee Lamb for Devin Singletary and Jaylen Warren. That's just not going to happen in most cases. We need to make trades that are going to put you over the top for you to win a fantasy football championship. And I have identified 4 buy low trade targets before Week 12 fantasy football. So today we're going to discuss who those 4 buy low trade targets are in fantasy football. And guys, I am filming this at 5 in the morning on Monday morning because I need this to get out to you in plenty of time for you to make these moves before the week. So please like this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Let's go ahead and just dive right into these trade targets right here. So the first guy on the list right here, it's going to be CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans right here. So let me reiterate this immediately right out of the gate. It's not likely to buy any sort of real player on the cheap before Week 12. And CJ Stroud falls into that category. But after the week that he just had in Week 11, we are looking for any angle possible that we could get any type of this type of player. CJ Stroud is the quarterback 8 on the year in fantasy football. Now, obviously, he had that 40-point game just a couple of weeks ago, right? Well, if you take out that one 40-point game that CJ Stroud had, his best game has been in the low 20s. And he's had a couple of them, but that's been his best game ever since that 40-point game. And what he has ahead of him, he's got a very tough regular season, rest of season schedule for your regular season of the playoffs. He's got Jacksonville, then he's got Denver's remade secondary. By the way, looks a lot better than it did versus the Miami Dolphins very early in the season. And then he's got the New York Jets secondary, a very, very tough matchup. So he's got a string of really tough matchups here to end the fantasy football regular season. It's something to mention here. Just simply mentioning and not diving too deep onto why he's a bad player, mentioning the fact that if you take out the 40-point game and that his regular season, rest of season schedule is really tough, those are important things to mention here to someone who may have some seed of doubt already in their head about CJ Stroud. Because his fantasy football playoffs, things get a lot better. He plays Tennessee that first week, then he plays Cleveland. Now, Cleveland is going to be tough regardless of how you cut it. No matter how you cut this one, that's a tough matchup. But then he plays Tennessee again. He gets Tennessee twice and Cleveland once. Cleveland sandwiched in there as the hardest one. But other than that, this is a guy I want for my fantasy playoffs as my quarterback 1. I would start out with a deal like Josh Dobbs, who has looked really good and is actually the quarterback 7 on the year right now. And combine him with a guy like Jerome Ford or Ramondre Stevenson. That's where I would start there because the reality is, guys, like I said, if there's any angle for you to buy an impact player to put you over the top, that's exactly the move that we need to make before your fantasy football playoffs to win you a championship. The next guy we have up here, I actually don't think this one is too terribly unlikely. People have had doubts about Stefon Diggs basically since really the early portion of the season. The early portion of the offseason, people had doubts about Stefon Diggs. My own audience has actually expressed doubt about Stefon Diggs, and I don't think it's out of line. I really don't. I mean, this is a guy who's had a really weird season. And dating back to the offseason, it looked like he wanted out of Buffalo, right? He wasn't reporting to minicamp. He wasn't reporting to some training camp. There was a lot of times that Stefon Diggs was absent before the start of the season. And it seems like a lot of frustrations have really carried into this season for Stefon Diggs here. So I can understand why people have their doubts about a guy like Stefon Diggs. Now, a player like this, I typically like to mention what the playoff schedule is and what the regular season schedule is. The reality here, guys, is that with a player like Stefon Diggs, schedule really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I mean, this is a guy who was putting up 21 points on the New York Jets secondary in week 1. Put up 19 points on the Cincinnati Bengals secondary a couple of weeks ago. This is a guy that really doesn't need a favorable schedule for him to produce. We all understand that, right? The reason that you trade for this guy is because Stefon Diggs is a player that can put you over the top and win you a fantasy championship. This is the type of guy that could do it. I'll give you a story. Last year, in one of my redraft leagues, I already had Justin Jefferson and Stefon Diggs on my roster as my first 2 wide receivers. And I had Keenan Allen as my flex option. I wanted to put myself over the top so I could win a fantasy championship. So what I did was I packaged together Keenan Allen with Jeff Wilson, who at the time was having some big games for Miami, and I was able to get Jamar Chase out of the deal. Jamar Chase trioed together with Justin Jefferson and Stefon Diggs. That put me over the top. This is the move that will put you over the top right here. With Stefon Diggs, you want to find anybody who has him that has even a seed of doubt and let them know that you're interested. I would start with a deal like Michael Pittman or Jordan Addison, package them together with Tony Pollard and also Josh Dobbs as well. I think a couple of middle tier players that aren't bad, but just aren't great, can get the job done on this one. And if there's any angle to do it, I would absolutely do it. The next guy I have up here, I called him a buy low last week. So he's making his second straight appearance on these buy low videos. And it's Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars here. Now in that video, and in a couple of videos following, I said that he might have another bad week against Tennessee in week 11. And that's exactly what happened. He had another dud performance in the single digits, regardless of what scoring platform you had in week 11 versus the Tennessee Titans' stout run defense. In fact, that's not it. Tank Bigsby had his career high in carries last week. He had 9 carries in week 11. Now, Tank Bigsby, if you remember, was very concerning to a lot of people during the offseason. 3rd round rookie out of Auburn for the Jacksonville Jaguars. A lot of people thought this is going to be a situation where a guy like Tank Bigsby is going to eat into Travis Etienne's targets and his opportunities as a whole. And in fact, I've been big on Travis Etienne for all season long. Dating back to the offseason, I've been all in on Travis Etienne. For those of you who've been with my channel since June, July, you already understand this. I've been big on Travis Etienne for a long, long time. And I said before the season started, I think the Tank Bigsby worries, we're going to look back at it, and it's going to be very similar to what Zamir White was to Josh Jacobs in 2022 and those concerns before the season. And it's largely turned out exactly like that. But of course, Tank Bigsby having 9 carries in week 11 is going to worry some people. Here's the thing. He's still averaging 2.3 yards per carry. He's not a real threat. Someone who has Travis Etienne, though, they may be worried about this. And again, the seed of doubt. Anyone who has a little bit of a seed of doubt is who we're trying to get him from. Because this is going to be your last chance to buy low. Upcoming, he takes on Houston and their poor defense. And then he's going to take on Cincinnati before the playoffs. Cincinnati has been good, but they're about to really drop off without Joe Burrow. Then, after Baltimore in week 1 of the fantasy football playoffs, which of course is a tough matchup. After that game, he takes on Tampa Bay and he takes on Carolina. Those are the weeks that can win you a fantasy championship. I would start with a package like Tony Pollard, Chris Olave, and Terry McLaurin and try to go after Travis Etienne. Because the reality is, if you can catch someone with a seed of doubt on Travis Etienne and his situation, you can absolutely trade a guy coming off a big week again, Tony Pollard. A guy who has been a pretty solid wide receiver too, and Chris Olave, and a guy who has upside play with Terry McLaurin. This is the move I'm trying to make before my fantasy football playoffs to win a championship with. The last guy on the list right here, I got Jaden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. Now, before we get into the depth of why, let me be clear on a couple things here. He may very well be on your waiver wire come Wednesday morning. This guy is rostered in about 18.5% of ESPN leagues right now. So if he is on your waiver wire, pick this guy up. Priority ad 100%. This guy is coming off 2 straight good games. Coming off a 16-point game in week 10 and a 17-point game in half PPR in week 11. Ordinarily, players who are coming off 2 straight big weeks are not what you would consider to be a buy low candidate. So why is he here? Why is Jaden Reed on this list right here? I'll tell you why. I believe that Jaden Reed has the legit chance to be what I thought Jackson Smith-Njigba was going to be for you this year. I believe he's got a real chance to be a league-winning type of player. So over the offseason, I made a Dynasty rookie draft guide, and I highlighted and scouted 80-plus rookies in this year's class, and I ranked them for you to draft them in the offseason in Dynasty. So I was really big on Jaden Reed. And I just want to give you an excerpt from the draft guide on what I had to say about Jaden Reed at the time. What I said was, when you watch him on tape, he does have some interesting characteristics. He's definitely versatile. For Michigan State, he caught deep balls, jump balls, returned punts, and even threw the ball on occasion. So what does this tell you right here? Well, number one, this draft guide is going to significantly help you in the future by making the best rookie picks. I have one coming out for 2024. Make sure to stay tuned and get that one for yourself. Number two thing it tells you is that Green Bay is using him in multiple ways for a reason. He led Green Bay in rushing in week 11. This is a really, really versatile, really athletic player that they are just trying to get the ball in this guy's hands. This is a really good player right here. And on top of that, this guy's schedule is fantastic. He's got Detroit's secondary, which Chicago, DJ Moore, Justin Fields just had plenty of success against in week 11. Then he's got the New York Giants secondary before the playoffs. This is before the playoffs. His playoff schedule, I should have highlighted in another video because Jaden Reed's playoff schedule is top tier. Tampa Bay in week 1, Carolina in week 2, and Minnesota in your championship week. This is a legit guy who can win you a league this year. I would start out with a deal like Terry McLaurin or Jacoby Myers for Jaden Reed. And honestly, Jaden Reed is not viewed that favorably right now. I think you could get more in addition to Jaden Reed. I think you could treat him as a throw-in player to someone like a Kyron Williams, maybe even a Kareem Hunt. I don't love Jordan Love. I don't love his quarterback situation. But guys, I'm telling you this right now. He has the look of a second half, important playoff performance type of league winner for you in fantasy football this year. And I want my audience to have the fruits of this guy because I think he's got a legit chance to win you guys a fantasy football championship this year. So let me know who you are actively trying to trade away and target before week 12 fantasy football. And later on this afternoon, I will be having a fantasy football playoff video coming out again for you to prepare. So make sure to stay tuned for that video, and I'll see you all there.